Welcome to the Great British Quilter podcast. I'm Sarah Ashford, and as a modern quilter and founder of the Great British Quilter Instagram Challenge, I've spent the last 3 years galvanising and championing British quilters and the quilting industry. In this series, I speak to British quilt designers, fabric companies, publishers and shop owners to discover their behind-the-scenes stories and to discuss what it means to be a part of the quilting community today. Enormous thanks go to our sponsors Bernina, the choice of the enthusiastic quilter worldwide, and to Orifil. With their help, we've been able to bring this inspiring podcast to you. Deb McGuire started quilting with the birth of her eldest child after a stint of living in the States, and she's sewn through the modern quilting revolution and a bit out the other side, describing her style now as coming full circle to that of a contemporary nostalgic. Her quilts are determinedly uniquely British, drawing on the deep roots of British patchwork and quilting styles and methods to create quilts rich with meaning and place. Most recently, Deb has been making a series of quilts inspired by iconic British quilts in the V&A and the Quilters Guild collection. Debs has been immersed in the quilting world for nearly 20 years. When her kids were babies, Deb ran a small online quilt kit business designing and kitting up baby quilt kits. This evolved into designing quilts to teachers' classes, and the classes turned into a busy shop and a classroom called the Plain Stitch Workroom, which she ran for 5 years until 2017, where she taught several hundred new quilters to sew via her beginner's simple sampler Introduction to Quilting class. Deb now uses her business background of marketing and branding for the Quilters Guild, working as an executive director of the commercial arm of the Guild, as well as a volunteer in a charitable capacity as their digital officer. This results in a hugely varied workload, from running the newly invigorated Instagram platform to this year's new commercial ventures into the first Guild block of the month and a new book celebrating the collection. Deb has also recently bought a Gammill long arm, and she's enjoying learning new skills and sharing this with new customers to her burgeoning long arm quilting business. In her Instagram bio, @PlainStitchDeb, she says, "I like to make quilts. I'd call it a hobby, but clearly it's a compulsion." Her love of quilt making shows no signs of abating, despite being the most well-insulated house in her Chiltern village. Deb and I met in the heart of the British countryside, at a beautiful pub on the outskirts of Newbury. We had met briefly at last year's Festival of Quilts and have worked together on various projects in the last 18 months, but this was a wonderful chance to escape the regular hustle and bustle of daily life and catch up properly and really get to know one another. For this interview, Deb's talked of her personal journey into quilting, her several roles within the Quilters Guild, the excitement and events surrounding the 40th anniversary of the Quilters Guild, and her new venture into long arm quilting. Finally, Deb shared some top tips which you won't want to miss. Hi Deb, thank you so much for coming to meet me today. I'm really looking forward to chatting with you.
Me too.
So you've been quilting for almost 20 years. That's such an achievement. Can you tell us a bit more about how your quilting journey started?
Well, thank you so much for having me today. As you know, I am normally somebody who is more backstage, so you've coaxed me out into the bright lights in front of the microphone. So I'm looking forward to sharing with your listeners a bit more about what I do and about my quilting. 20 years. Yes, I think I was actually probably born a quilter, but I didn't make my first quilt until I was 20. I was one of those kids who always loved The Little House on the Prairie and What Katie Did and all those sorts of books that had quilts in them. But I made my first quilt when I was in my 20s, and I was posted to the States for a job, and I was there for a year, but I was in my 20s, so I was having a lovely time and not really thinking very much about quilts until I was on my way home, and I picked up a magazine in the airport and I was flicking through it, and there was an article about the quilter Denise Schmidt, who at that stage, there wasn't really a kind of modern quilting world. This was around the year 2000. And she was making quilts for interior decorators, and it was like a kind of homes and gardens magazine. But I saw that quilt and I just thought, oh, I want one of those. And
sometimes there's that light bulb moment, isn't there? Where you just think,
completely.
I want that.
Well, and she still remains one of my kind of biggest heroes, because I love the fact that her quilts have that sort of soul, like the old-fashionedness of them, but they are intrinsically modern and fresh. And there was just something about that. I thought, I think I could make one of those, which is that ridiculous thought that we all have to start with. And I rushed back into, there was like a Barnes & Noble at the airport, and I thought, I'd just buy a magazine and learn how to make a quilt. And I came back to the UK with this bundle of magazines and set about looking for a way to become a quilter. Now, although it's only 20 years ago, it was kind of before the internet, so you couldn't just Google, like, now you can get patterns, and so I was reliant on these magazines. I made my first quilt, which was absolutely dreadful. It was small and brown and not at all what I had in my mind's eye. And then, I don't know, time passed, and Etsy and eBay became, you could kind of get them on dial-up internet and connection. And so I decided I would buy a quilt from the States, and I purchased what I thought was going to be this beautiful little house on the prairie style quilt that was going to go on my bed. When it arrived, I took it out of the box and I realised that it was a quilt top and not a full quilt. So it was just the top layer, and I didn't really know the terminology, so I didn't realise what I'd bought. And I thought, okay, I'm going to have to turn this into a quilt, so I will learn to quilt it. And I went along for a class, completely oblivious, that was, learn to hand quilt. And I just rocked up with, nothing. And it was a class with a lady called Sandy Lush, who is one of the kind of Britain's most preeminent hand quilters, and she was absolutely fantastic. And all the other people there were hand quilters already who wanted to work on their technique, and then there was me. But she was so patient and so kind and so inspiring, and she spent a day, and by the end of that day I could quilt with the rocking stitch, so where you have the two metal thimbles and you hold them either side in a hoop. And it's just a really quick, really efficient way of hand quilting something really big, and it remains one of my favourite skills and one of my favourite ways of making a quilt. So I was actually a quilter before I was a patchworker, really. Then I had kids, and like so many people, I think a lot of people will recognise themselves in this, I wanted to make quilts for babies, and then toddler beds, and then the next size bed, and there's a lot of quilting to be done in those years.
Yes.
And that corresponded with the rise of modern quilting, and I was on a Flickr group that was called Fresh Modern Quilts, which was the first time that I was starting to see quilts that were like the quilts that I made. Up until that point, I was a solitary quilter. I didn't, I had young kids. I could not get out to a group at night. And so it was like the world suddenly kind of opened up, and there were all these other people making quilts like me. And obviously in the UK, there was an e-magazine that was run by Katie Jones that was called Fat Quarterly.
Yes.
And that was just the beginning of, my kind of quilting passion, because it was other people living similar lives to me who made quilts like the ones that I wanted in my house. Our kind of style, and from then on I didn't really look back. So I made baby quilts. I had friends who wanted to make quilts for their kids, and so I started kind of making little kits for people, and then I sold those kits on Folksy when Folksy began.
Yes.
So I did that for a little while, and then lots of people would say, I still, even with a kit, I want a class to show me how to make it. So I started teaching classes, and that led to lots more classes. I designed quilts for those, wrote a bit for some magazines back then. There was a magazine called So Hip. I don't know if you remember that one.
Yes.
That was a long time ago. And I ran my shop. So it was a kind of a slow burn, but it was one of those things that sometimes I'd always done a bit of knitting and different other kind of crafts, But quilting kind of hit me, and I just knew then that I was going to be a quilter forever, really.
Absolutely. And I think the internet was so instrumental in that for so many people at that time, wasn't it?
Oh, completely. I mean, it was just this window of inspiration. I think, about that time I joined the Quilters Guild as well. And that was just because I wanted to kind of meet other people who were quilters. And there are those groups out there for people. But, I had 3 children under 5 at that stage. And it's just really hard to ever leave the house, isn't it? So the internet gave me all that same kind of community and people to ask and ideas to get ideas from. And sort of, the flick of a button when the kids were in bed. So
that sense of belonging without having to actually physically go anywhere.
Yeah, completely.
You draw a lot of inspiration from quilts from the past, and most recently quilts from the V&A and the Quilters Guild collections. Can you tell us a bit more about this?
Yes. I think probably the roots of that are back in 2010. So because I was blogging and making quilts and posting about them online at that time, and there weren't many people that did, and so somehow I managed to get invited to the press day for the Victoria and Albert Museum when they did an exhibition that was called Hidden Histories, Untold Stories, and it was British quilts from 1700 to 2010, and it was the story of British quilting. And I went along with, just thinking, it's going to be nice to look at some lovely quilts. And I came out and I pretty much think my quilting world had kind of turned on its head. So until then, I'd been really inspired by quilts that had that sense of soul. So I wanted to make quilts that felt like they'd got some history to them. But because of the kind of quilts that I was seeing and becoming into contact with, they were American quilts. And all of a sudden there was this whole world of British quilting that I didn't know anything about. And I remember walking through the exhibition, getting to the end and thinking, I can't go out. I just need to go round again. And again. And I kind of just went the whole way backwards. And there were so many quilts in there that were so inspirational. And I think that kind of sowed that seed in me that I've always loved, the thing I love about quilts so much is the fact that they are like this kind of portal into someone's life at the time that they made it. And I've always been really interested in the historical side of that. And I've always been interested in the idea that you're telling a story about your life. And I think, that element of it was so kind of rich and so important in that exhibition. It was about stories as much as about the quilts themselves. And so I went away from there just with my head kind of going, whoa, quilts to make. So I kind of made, the first time that I really accessed that Britishness, I suppose, was when there was a film that came out called The Big Friendly Giant. Everyone knows it, the Roald Dahl film. And it was the Steven Spielberg version. And I live in a little village just outside of West Roald Dahl lived and wrote.
I have been there, yes.
Well, and I visited his little hut and sat in his chair. His wife used to open their garden for open gardens. It was very, very lovely. And so when I was there, so when we saw this film, there was this beautiful quilt that you saw, just little glimpses of it as the film was going on. So the little girl Sophie gets pulled out of the window by the Big Friendly Giant, and she takes with her this quilt. And it looked like Liberty fabric, and it looked like it was a frame quilt. And I was looking at that style thinking, I've not seen that before. Who designed it? Where did it come from? And I couldn't find out. And 2 of my kids were with me at the time, my 2 daughters, and they were obviously like, Mummy, we want a Big Friendly Giant quilt. And so I started researching that style, frame quilts, and it kind of led me into the Quilters Guild collection. So the Quilters Guild has this huge collection of traditional quilts and modern and contemporary quilts, but they had lots of these quilts that were this same frame style, and it's such a typical kind of British style. And I, in typical gung-ho fashion, thought, well, I can design one of these. Anyone who's ever made a frame quilt will know that the maths of getting all those frames to fit together is like a bit head-scratchy. So that one was a bit of a fun one to make, but I love making it. And then after that, it was like I'd kind of gone down a rabbit hole. There were so many interesting quilts within that collection that I just wanted to look at and think about what they were saying now. So not to make copies of quilts from the past, but to use the kind of patterns and designs and the things that are typical of British quilting and reinvent them in a modern way. Because I think the modern kind of quilt movement had, up until that point, been very much about American traditions and American quilting traditions. And I made lots of quilts like that and still love those. But, I live in a little village in the middle of England, with kids and horses and ponies and, I wanted my quilts to be about me. And at the same time as that was happening, I was asked to appear on a Radio 4 programme, which was called Moving Pictures, which was all about a quilt called the Anne West coverlet. And it's a quilt that's in the Victoria and Albert Museum, and it's a huge masterpiece of a quilt, but it's made up of lots of little blocks that are all appliqued, and some of them are kind of biblical and sort of instructional, but lots of them are pictures of her life. And so the idea is that she was reflecting what she was seeing out of the window, and she was sewing that into little squares. And so I did a lot of research into that quilt when I was working on that programme, and I was thinking about afterwards, would a future quilt historian be able to link my quilts back to me? And obviously with a name like Anne West, she was quite hard to find the exact woman, but we were able to link to whereabouts in the country it had been. There were lots of clues within her making that she had left for someone to be able to link it to her. And I thought, I had made quilts that were from, international patterns, quilt-alongs around the world, which I love doing, loads of community, lots of fun doing that. But essentially, I was thinking, is that going to be me in this year, in this village, in this part of Britain? I wanted to make something that was really about that. And so I went away and I made a version of, well, not a version of the Anne West coverlet, that's like, hers is amazing. But I made something inspired by the Anne West coverlet that was sort of pictures of my world. So I was thinking, these days, our Instagram feed is that perfect curation. It's essentially the same as those little pictures that woman had in 1800 looking out of her window.
Just the modern way of doing it, isn't it?
Yeah.
I guess in those days, putting those images into a quilt was, a fantastic idea.
Exactly. That was how you kind of preserved it, I suppose. And I guess we still have that same concern now. We're making these digital records of our lives, but how will they stay with us? So I took my favourite pictures from my Instagram feed, about my kind of family and my kids and what we like to do, and I made each one of those up in fabric into a quilt. Actually, that quilt's going to be at Festival of Quilts this year, and I just love making that. And after that, I then couldn't stop. So I've gone away and made a series of different quilts that are all with their sort of roots in quilts from the Guild collection, not or the Victoria and Albert Museum, not just the sort of amazing quilts. So I made a 1718 coverlet last year. I think a lot of people saw that.
Yes.
It was amazing to see at Festival of Quilts all the different versions lined up together last year. But I also like the really humble quilts. I'm a real fan of the quilts, because when I was teaching classes, people would often say to me, I'd be saying to them, you must put a label on your quilt and say where it was made and something about you. And they'd say, oh, no one's going to want my quilt in the future. But we don't know what quilts will survive. And what's so lovely about collections like the Guild collection is that there's a real mixture of different quilts, within them, from the really humble to the amazing, sort of craftsmanship. And the ones with a kind of humble quirkiness are the ones that really kind of capture my heart. So I just recently, I wrote an article for the Quilter magazine, which is the Guild's members only magazine, talking about how you can try and incorporate that sense of our quilting history in the quilts that you make. And for that article, I made a quilt called the Bertha Mitchell quilt, which is just a basic half square triangle quilt. But I made mine using just fabrics that were made or designed, by British designers in the last sort of 5 years. And so I had lots of that kind of fabric in my stash. So people like Katie Jones, there was lots of fabric in there that I could have enjoyed. Anila Hui, Lou Summers, Karen Lewis. Janet Clare, Liberty. There are lots to choose from. But I wanted it to be stuff that you could only get now and that you could only have bought here, and that would have shown that it was a quilt that was made now.
Unique to the UK in this time and place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like the idea that you've got that kind of echo of this woman in the past. There's a really lovely story around Bertha Mitchell, because she was a boarding house, like the lady in charge of the kids at a boarding school, and so she had that kind of rich story, and she made the quilt for her sister, or one of her sisters, when they got married. And so I really like the idea that these little kind of hops back through time, that you might find this quilt and then link it back to that quilt and then beyond. So there's that kind of element to what I do. Yeah.
And you've recently just bought a long arm. That's very exciting.
Yes.
Why did you decide to buy a long arm? How are you getting on with it?
You're not the first person to ask me that, especially when you try and explain it to people who aren't quilters. Well, actually, lots of quilters. Long arming is kind of mysterious still, isn't it? It's like the unicorn of the quilting world.
Yes.
And why did I buy it? It was serendipity. I think it's one of those things where sometimes life just happens, doesn't it? I had a lovely lady who used to do a lot of the quilting for the people that came to my classes, and I said to her years ago, if you ever retire, you must let me buy you a long arm machine. And she was nowhere near ready to retire at that point. And then years later she came to me and said, would you like to buy it? And I am denied, thinking, gosh, how often is anyone going to ever offer me a long arm machine? And I thought I couldn't find a reason not to, and I just thought this could be a really fun new way of kind of exploring the creativity around my quilts and quilting. So I'm really enjoying it. Yeah, I've had it since Christmas. And
are you teaching yourself then, or?
Yeah, so a mixture of things. So there's loads of really great resources online, lots of online kind of tutorials. The lady who I bought it from is very kind and helped me with lots of the kind of setup. And then there's various classes that I'm kind of taking alongside that. But yeah, I've always been somebody who's not good at following patterns. I really like to just kind of do my own thing. And I see a lot of long arm quilting, and I you have that kind of sense of that there's a way that you'd like to go about it, and there's a look that you'd like to have on your quilts. And so, it's about kind of working that out. But alongside that, I'm doing kind of pantograph quilting, so edge to edge. A lot of people, it is hard, isn't it, to long arm to quilt on your domestic machine a big quilt.
A big quilt, yes.
And a lot of people really struggle with that, and so it's a really nice service to have for people.
I think sometimes that's a barrier to people making bigger quilts.
Absolutely.
As well.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, there is just nothing nicer than going and dropping off your quilt top and coming back in a few weeks' time and it all just being
looks
finished.
Beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really enjoy being kind of part of other people's creative process. What I loved about the shop was that I had that kind of input with people about helping them to bring to life what was in their head. And I think the long arm quilting is just another part of that, really. Yeah.
You've got so many strings to your bow, haven't you? So you have several roles at the Quilters Guild of the British Isles. Can you tell us a little bit more about the roles you have there?
Yes. So the main role that I have there is as a director for the Quilters Guild commercial side of the business. So the Quilters Guild is a charity, and it's run by its trustees. And then anything that it does that is money making due to charity law goes through a separate registered company, and I'm a director of that company. But my role is essentially marketing, and that always sounds very kind of marketing. But really, what I think of as my role is to tell as many people as possible all the wonderful things about the Guild, because often people have heard of the Guild, they don't necessarily know about it, and it does have a very sort of foreboding name. We've got a very formal name for an organisation which is really very organic and warm, and it's all about volunteers across the country in every element of quilting, in every area of quilting interest, experts, beginners, and everybody in between. and it's a wonderful organisation. So I mean, I really have the best job in the world. My background is marketing and advertising, and so I get to talk about something that I love and use the skills that I had. It's not like, you know, selling tins of beans or something.
Something you're genuinely passionate about and believe in.
Yeah, and I really feel, you know, I love what I do every day. So, you know, the Quilters Guild is a huge, many tentacled octopus. You know, we have you know, local groups and groups within the regions. We have specialist groups, so you can sew with other people that have the same kind of aesthetic interests as you, or specialist interests. So things like the British Quilt Study Group. So they're a group of people who write academic papers around quilt study and social history, and not just looking at traditional quilts, but looking at current quilting trends and how that is impacting on social history of today. So it's a really interesting area, and they have some, you know, amazing experts there. People like Dorothy Osler, who, you know, is a world-renowned expert in North Country quilting, so Northumberland and Durham. Mary Jenkins in Wales. There are just so many people with so much information and knowledge. It's a wonderful thing to be able to do. So my role really is to kind of bring that all out for people to see. It can be really hard with any kind of organisation, especially big organisations where, you know, you have these little kind of silos within it, and people within that group will know about what they do and enjoy it. But it's about being able to show that to a wider world and make sure that everyone can see all the really important things that happen within our guild. You know, we are really lucky, and it's quite unique in Britain that we have a national guild, and so we have this kind of really broad church of all different styles of quilting and all different you know, kind of backgrounds and interests. And so I think in terms of a kind of creative stew, it's the perfect mix. I mean, I love modern quilting, and I love that kind of community. But if you don't ever go outside of that community, you only see quilts that are similar to the sorts of quilts that you're making. And it's really nice to be able to see you know, other forms of making. And I suppose, you know, part of where I've ended up with my making has been due to that. It's about kind of taking that history and melding it with a kind of modern sensibility of what, you know, makes a beautiful quilt. So I always really encourage people to get involved in the guild. You know that I'm always kind of behind the scenes saying to people, you know, are you a member of the guild? I'm a bit evangelical. I have sort of three areas really that I have to concentrate on. The first is heritage. So it's about making, you know, we have this amazing collection. It's a historical collection. It's an important collection, and it's about making that relevant to people today. So, you know, there are quilts of the past, but within our collection, we're also collecting modern quilts now. Just collected 2 modern quilts this year. We've got a whole new exhibition coming in the summer at our birthday celebration at Festival of Quilts, where we're taking in new work from members who don't have pieces currently in the collection. So that will be a kind of snapshot of today.
And won't that be interesting to look back on in 20 years' time, for example?
Absolutely. Well, we have a similar collection that was done in the 1990s. And then very much the kind of resurgent form was art quilts and contemporary quilting. And so it's interesting now to kind of see, you know, as you know, the quilting world changes and new influences come in, how that's going to be different. And, you know, in a way, it's almost like creating a time capsule. It's exactly what a quilt should be. You know, this idea that you're kind of taking and freezing in time, this moment in time, but in something that can be used and appreciated and loved, you know, for generations to come. And I think, you know, things like the 1718 last year, this year we've got a lovely exhibition around one of the quilts called the Bloomfield Coverlet. It's called the Mary and Edwin Bloomfield Coverlet, and it's a quilt that was made by a couple when they lost their child, and all of the specialist groups within the UK have been interpreting that in their own way. So we've got, you know, people making miniature quilts, people making sort of really contemporary art quilts, dyeing all their own fabric, people making modern versions, and looking at, you know, how that same human emotion, which doesn't change over 150 years, how you can sort of reinterpret that in a quilt today, and the kind of links between those. There's a lovely phrase that one of the ladies who was involved in setting up that exhibition used, the phrase listening to the whispers of our sisters, and I've always loved that. I've held that with me because, you know, and I she would have loved to see this exhibition, and it really has got that in there. So I think it's really important that we're collecting quilts of the past but making them relevant for today, and finding new ways for people to enjoy them. And we've got things like our block of the month, which I'll talk about a bit more in a bit later on. So finding new ways for people to use those historical quilts for inspiration. Education's a really big area for the Guild. A lot of people worry that you have to be a really good quilter to be in the Guild, and what we really want is for new quilters to join as well. We have a lot of programmes for new quilters. We have loads of bursaries, ways that you can get funding to take extra classes and increase your knowledge. So those things are all really important, and I think that's something that I really enjoy publicising that. I love making people aware of that, because there are all these resources, and a lot of these bursaries have been given in the name of somebody who was a quilter, passionate quilter, and their families get a huge amount of joy out of seeing that kind of move on to the next generation of quilters. And then the last area, and the most kind of fun area, is around community. So the Quilters Guild, at its heart, as well as all these sort of lovely serious things that we do, is about lots of quilters coming together and loving what they do and having a passion and sharing that passion. And so a lot of what I do at the moment, this first year in the role, has been about finding ways to connect quilters to each other. And we've been, using social media to do that, and lots of other ways to help people who, can't necessarily get along to groups, or can't always do that, So, there are people with caring responsibilities, people with busy lives, people are retiring later, and they've got, complex lives. And so it's nice to find as many ways as possible to let people make those connections, because I think, all quilters would say at the heart of their quilting is that kind of shared endeavour with friends.
Absolutely. And that leads me on really nicely to my next question. You've taken on the role of digital officer for the Guild, and I know how hard you've worked to really make some positive changes and engage a wider audience. So how's that going?
Yeah.
As far as I can see, it's going great.
Yeah. Well, I really enjoyed that. That was kind of a job by accident in a way, because obviously one of the big planks of the marketing role is around bringing that kind of digital side to life for the Guild. So we've got a Facebook page, which is the Quilters Guild, and you can find that on Facebook. If you're a Guild member, you can also join a members group, and there you have to give your Guild number. So that's called QGBI, so Quilters Guild British Isles. And if you search for that as a group, you can join that and talk to other members. And that's very much run by the members for the members. So it's moderated by members post there. So I don't really get involved in that area, but I do the corporate sort of side of the Guild's Facebook page. And then I've also brought about Instagram in the last year. So we had a little Instagram account, we had a few followers, and in the spring last year we decided to make that one of our kind of platform areas to try and encourage more new quilters to come to us. And I've really, that was a new role, so there wasn't a role as a digital officer before, and so I've kind of taken that on because it's so tied up with what I'm doing at the moment anyway, but I have so much fun doing that. It's not really a job at all. So you'll know that we post lots of stuff on there. So on Instagram we're at the Quilters Guild, and so there's new stuff every week. We do lots of things, like we have a great database on our website where we have all of the events that are happening all over the UK. But you really have to kind of go to it and find it and search it. So what we try and do with Instagram is bring things out, so resources that are already there, but just to kind of remind people about them, because a lot of it is, we're all busy, aren't we?
Sometimes you just need that reminder or that
absolutely.
prompt rather than having to go and hunt for it yourself.
That's it. And Instagram is so nice for that, isn't it? Because you can just have a little quick scroll, and it's you got 5 minutes between whatever else you're doing, and so we hope that we're sort of popping up in people's consciousness, and we're saying, did you know this? Remember this? Come along to this. Look at this amazing thing. And I am never short of things to write about, and I think that is a testament to how kind of rich and busy and creatively fulfilling the Guild is.
Absolutely.
Because there is just so much going on everywhere.
And people don't necessarily always realise how much is going on, and so Instagram is a fantastic way to sort of instantly share that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, if you're a Guild member, you have the Quilter magazine, which is something we're really proud of. That the magazine is Guild members only, and we produce that ourselves, and we know that our members love that magazine, and that is is full of information. But, there's also a big kind of audience for us out there of people who maybe aren't members yet, or, are getting round to it, or, it's just something that they meant to do and they haven't done yet, or they're waiting for their birthday. And so we also try and kind of use these digital platforms to talk to those people. So we've also brought out a newsletter, and our newsletter is open to all quilters. So it's not just about members, it's about everybody. And obviously there's a lot more detail in the magazine for our members, but the newsletter gives people a kind of taste for what's going on. Because, we want to kind of think of ourselves as, that kind of mothership of, quilting, if you like. So we are in a privileged position in that we have a lot of experts, we have a lot of interesting events, things come to us, and we want to share that with all quilters in the UK and beyond. We have an international membership category that people can join as well. There's a lot going on. Yeah.
And this year is a particularly busy year for you. The Festival of Quilts is just a few weeks away now, and it's particularly exciting because it's the celebration of 40 years of the Quilters Guild of the British Isles. So I know there's lots of fun things planned. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes. There's a lot of people working very hard behind the scenes at the moment. It's going to be fantastic. We're very excited about Festival of Quilts. It's our 40th birthday, and so people who are guild members would have been getting the magazine and reading about the sort of origins of the guild, which I've really enjoyed. I think a lot of people have, because you kind of join an organisation, you don't think too much about its past, but we've had a lot of the founder members of the guild are still with us, and they've been talking about where we came from. So our birthday is both a celebration of that, kind of looking back. This was women and men with a passion for quilting who created this guild that is now, a national thing. But we're also looking forward. I think 40 is that funny age, isn't it? I think we can all, it's like the guild has matured and it's become this national guild. But, in your 40s, you can kind of settle into what you do, and it's about being confident in yourself. And I think, the guild is at that place as well. It's about looking to the future. And it's particularly exciting for us because there's a lot of things that are kind of coming to fruition that we've been working on for probably the last 18 months. So I've got lots of things to tell you about. Now, if you're coming along to Festival of Quilts and you haven't been before, you won't know that it's just so full on. And anyone who's been already will know this. You almost need to write a list of things that you've got to get done. Yeah. There is nothing worse than sitting on the train on the way home and looking through your Instagram and going, oh no, I missed that. I didn't realise that. So I'm going to give you a long list. If you've got a pencil, you might want to take some notes here.
What must we see?
What must we see? I think the first thing that we must see, to celebrate our 40 years, our curator, Heather Auden, has taken 40 quilts that tell the history of the Guild and tell the history of British quilting. So they are the pieces that we've collected over that time. They're the pieces with stories behind them, fascinating kind of stories often, and why they're important. I mean, there is everything in there from, the finest workmanship to like amazing 1970s like patchwork bikinis, it's like there's just everything. That's going to be an exhibition, and we've also produced a book to go alongside that exhibition, and that book, you can pre-order that already on the Quilters Guild website, on our shop website. If you go to the Quilters Guild, you'll be able to follow the links through to that, or you can buy it at Festival of Quilts, and our curator Heather is signing books for us. It's all very exciting. And she'll be there on the Friday. There's also a lecture. She's giving a lecture about those pieces. So that's a really nice place to start if you want to have that kind of experience of, like British quilting and what's
that
it about.
Journey, absolutely.
And I don't think that there hasn't really been that since that Victoria and Albert Museum exhibition that I talked about. So it's going to be really nice, I think.
And really, that exhibition was quite a long time ago now.
Yes.
I mean, I went and I remember it like yesterday, but like you say, it was 2010.
I know.
And here we are, 2019 already.
Well, I think it's going to be great for that, sort of new cohort of quilters. There are a lot of people that have come to quilting in that time, and, that social media has kind of made it more visible to people. And so I think, plus, for our members who have been with the Guild for a long time, there's a lot of pieces there that were, fundraised within the Guild. And so they're kind of the members for all the members. So that's going to be really nice to be able to show those off to them. The second thing is something I'm super excited about. So I've been working on this behind the scenes. It's very exciting. Is our Block of the Month programme. So it's the first time we've done this. So we have taken a quilt from our collection, which is called the Red Manor House. And it's a lovely quilt, really kind of whimsical and just lovely, very English. We've worked with a designer called Jenny Smith and Kay Walsh, and they have created a sort of modern contemporary version of the original that works as a block of the month, and we've tried really hard to incorporate lots of different types of techniques within it and lots of different sort of styles and ways of putting it together. We're filming support videos to go with that with Crafters Companion and Katie Jones, and so those will be available to people signing up to the Block of the Month as well. So each month you'll get a pattern, PDF pattern that is emailed to you, and then you have access to the video, and that's going to be great for people who are new to a certain technique or new to quilting, in fact.
That's really valuable, actually, to have the video as well, because people learn in different ways, don't they?
Absolutely.
And to actually be able to see somebody doing that technique, and then you can pause it and rewind it and watch it again if you need to.
Absolutely. And we've got it's been such fun to do. We've got a huge range of people presenting the different videos. So with people with different skills, putting their own kind of quirky take on it. So Jenny and Kay are making a really beautiful version of the quilt, of their pattern. We've also got pattern testers working all over the country on different elements of it, putting it together in their own style. It was really important to us that people would be able to kind of approach it in lots of different ways. So there is a fabric bundle that will come with it that you can purchase if you want to. That's a Riley Blake bundle, and we've a limited edition of those. But also, by having lots of people making versions, we want it to be that you can dive into your own stash and use your own fabric, put your own stamp on it. It's really important that people are kind of feeling empowered to use their fabric, and it's not very strict about what must go here and there. We've also got a thread collection going alongside it. So Aurifil have been helping us put together a little mixed pack of threads to enable you to do all the different, because there's elements of applique and some like decorative stitching and all sorts. So a really fun little gift for yourself if you're at Festival of Quilts. So those will be there. So the Block of the Month is going to be great. We're having a big launch of that. That's on the Thursday, so that's the 1st of August at 11:30. And so come along to that. It's going to be at the Quilters Guild shop stand, which is behind the main guild stand. Yeah. People can always find our stand because it's right in front of where people come into the show. So if you head there, hopefully there'll be a big crowd. That's exciting. And then our birthday block, so Sarah has very kindly designed for us back at the start of the year some little blocks that are little party hats. And we have been asking our members and people in the wider community, quilting community, to buy the block pattern as a fundraiser. It's just like a fun way of raising money for the guild, but having some fun as well, and putting some element of community into it. So what we've loved about this is lots of different groups have been doing it together. So from people in their front room just like inviting their friends around, because you know what it's like, people are really busy and you have friends you like to sew with, but it's really hard to make time. So this has been one of those projects where people have gone, do you know what, I invited all my friends around and I made a cake. And so we've had lots of that. Lots of the kind of bigger groups, Quilters Guild groups, have been making them together, and people are sending their blocks in and they're going to form the decoration for the guild stand, so to sort of make it quite nice and birthday.
Oh, that's so lovely to hear. Yeah. I'm so thrilled to hear that. And I've seen so many popping up on Instagram and in the magazine. And
well, they're all coming into the office up in York, and it's a bit like the kind of Harry Potter where things are coming through the letterbox. Yes. They're so colourful, and there's pom-poms and trim and rick-rack and everything. It's just going to be glorious.
And my inspiration was taken from the newsletter heading that had the party hat at the top, and I just saw that party hat and thought that would be the perfect block to celebrate the 40 years.
It's been a lot of fun. We've really enjoyed that, and we're loving the response that we've had from everybody for it. So the Bloomfield coverlet is also going to be there. I've talked about that already. So that's going to be in the exhibition spaces, and I would really encourage people to go and see that. I think it's going to be really powerful. It's a really, I've seen some of the work that's been sent in for that. That's being kind of created at the moment, that exhibition, and there really are some beautiful pieces, and we're supported by the Child Bereavement Trust, Child Bereavement UK, who are a really lovely charity, do a lot of work in that area, and they've been really interested in the work that we're doing because, that whole area of kind of art therapy and it's a really interesting area. And I think, a lot of the makers, a lot of people make quilts because of their families, for their families. And so
Definitely.
I think it's an area that kind of touches on a lot of people. So that's going to be a really, kind of a quiet part of the exhibition. And I think it's something that, it'd be really nice for people to, sometimes you need just to go and look at something lovely and just take some time in your head. I think that's going to be there. We've got our new acquisitions to the collection, which will be there. So our modern quilts and our Spotlight at 40. I know you've had Jo on your show before now, and Jo's making a piece for that. So we're looking forward to seeing that. We've got a big birthday party. That's very exciting. I think you're coming along to that.
I am coming, absolutely.
Yes. So big night out on the Thursday night, and that's going to be fun. But if you're not at Festival of Quilts or you can't make that, don't worry, you're not missing out, because we are also going to have a sort of tea party in September, and that will be taking place up in York, but it will also be simultaneously happening around the country. So lots of our groups are having little kind of birthday parties for the guild.
Nice.
Yeah, that weekend or that day, and so that's going to be really nice. And we've invited a lot of our founder members along to that tea party, and there's going to be lots of things going on there. But that is open to all members, so if you can make your way to York in September, then the details for that again are on the website, and you can just email to say that you're coming along to that. So that would be a really nice gathering. What else? Now, if you're coming with kids, now Festival of Quilts, it's slap bang in the summer holidays, and so for anybody, with kind of kids or grandkids, I know that's a really big thing in the summer holidays. If you're coming with kids, Festival of Quilts is actually great with kids. We've got workshops for kids, they're £6, and if they're 8 and above, they can attend that on their own, and we've got fantastic tutors. Our Young Quilters gang are just... have got brilliant projects to do with the kids, and they always have such fun in those. So do consider coming along for that. You can nip out and do a little bit of shopping on your own. Happy doing that. They'll be happy kind of gluing and sewing. And we have great stuff. We're sponsored, our Young Quilters is sponsored by Lewis and Irene, and Brother lends us their machines, and we have Isoline sort of gluing and sticking and Bondaweb and what have you, and the kids have loads of fun in that. So that's a really nice thing to do. And then I suppose the last thing, kind of looking to the future, is we have a bursaries award which goes out to textile students, so people who are doing a BA in a textile related university degree, and we award that. So we have a short list who are allowed to come along and display at Festival of Quilts, and those guys are there, and their booths are always really interesting. There's such a lot to see at Festival of Quilts, but I would say go and have a look at that if you get a chance. They are the kind of future of where quilting and textile design is going to go, and they're always really inspirational to talk to. They're great guys, so I would say go and have a look at their booths as well. So yeah, there's a lot to do.
There's a lot to see and a lot to do. There really is.
Absolutely.
Okay, so finally, before we finish, I'd like you to share maybe 1 or 2 top tips with our listeners related to either quilting or business or social media, whatever you've got. So what advice would you give?
I love a top tip. I've been really enjoying everybody else's top tips. I think I've got 2. My first one is related to how I make. So my top tip would be make it yours, make it about you. So I mentioned that I wrote an article recently, and in there I was kind of talking about the thing that I'm always saying to people in real life. If you just add a little element of text or pictures, maybe some embroidery or a plique, something that's about you or your life, it can be lyrics. People often have song lyrics that mean something to them, or words from a poem. I always think, if you're thinking about the future quilt historian, and then you look at your work and you think, how do I link it back to me? And think about somebody, going through the kind of genealogical records, or, trying to look for different styles or something, that's specific to your region. I live in the Chilterns, which is known for its red kites, and I always try and put like a little red kite bird into things, or I'll put my dog, or, just anything that kind of just turns it into a quilt that would be fun for a future quilt historian to try and, link back to you. So that's my first tip. My second tip, this is a very practical one, beeswax.
Right, okay. Tell us more.
I absolutely love beeswax. It is just the most perfect thread conditioner, and I love it so much that we now keep bees
Oh, really?
to keep me in beeswax. But if you don't keep bees, or you're not into keeping bees, you can, like farmers markets have them, local beekeeping societies, they often have like a stall in your local farmers market, or, find a beekeeper, because they often have wax that they don't want. And if you set it into little bars, I use, the little pots that like stock cubes come in,
Oh, yes.
They're fantastic. You can decant your beeswax into there, and if you just run your thread through that, what's lovely is your thread doesn't knot, and it's really easy to kind of get out any of those knots and burrs that you get, like if you're hand quilting or you're embroidering. But the best thing about it, and the reason why it's my top tip, is that it smells like summer meadows, and it smells like summer meadows even in the middle of winter. So Sarah and I are sitting in a beautiful pub at the moment in June, looking out over the kind of sunshiny fields. But in the middle of winter, we can have this same kind of lovely feeling by having a little smell of beeswax. A bit strange, but yeah. So those would be my top tips.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Deb. It's been wonderful talking to you and learning more about the Quilters Guild and you as a quilter as well. So thank you. And see you at the Festival of Quilts.
Yes, come and see me. I'll be on the Guild stand.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you once again to our generous sponsors, Bernina, the choice of the enthusiastic quilter worldwide, and also to Orifil. With their help, we've been able to bring this podcast to you, and we thoroughly hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, we would love it if you would rate, review and subscribe to the Great British Quilter podcast. Please do tell your friends and spread the quilty love. Thank you.